You need to go through the agenda first. Yeah, Tom. Yeah, so if you could please, the first item on the agenda is to review and approve the draft minutes from the last Board of Adjustment meeting.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And make sure, I'm sorry, if you could turn your microphones on when you speak, please. Thank you.
Might help a little bit, eh?
There we go. Think so.
On-off switch.
All right, so now moving on to agenda item number 2, we have a variance case this evening, case number 2407V, located at 8610 Maverick Circle. This is approval or looking for approval of a variance for a detached garage with respect to relief from the rear yard setbacks. As you all may recall, this was actually a case that we saw with an appeals case as to some historic setbacks that were determined to be upheld. So we had recommended and made sense to then have the owner and applicant pursue the variance. So specifically, we're looking or the board is looking to provide potential approval of a new detached garage and studio space. Specifically, they're looking to allow for a little more than 23 feet of encroachment into the rear yard setback, where such structures are typically not permitted. I know we'll get to this next item, and I know it seems backwards, but it'll be, you'll see where the structure rests when we get a little bit further in the presentation. And as I just mentioned, there was a previous determination by the zoning administrator, myself, that was confirmed by you, the Board of Adjustment, that the historic setbacks were to be enforced. So I would say then in doing so, well, first let's see where the property is. The location is in Cowtrack Estates 2. You are familiar when we looked at this before, it was interesting that this parcel is sort of bounded on 3 sides by 3 different roadways. But early on, when the property was platted, and it's interesting historically, I always think it's interesting because this property was platted back in 1959. I think some people are really visionary that came out to Carefree then. But we had different rules and requirements, and so at that time when the house was built, the setbacks looked at front and rear, the front being off of Silver Saddle, which is the north-south roadway to on the left of the property boundary. So with that said, again, so looking at it, so these were the setbacks that were established when the house was built in the mid to late 90s, and so those were the setbacks that were codified when we last met. And so as you can see, and as detailed in your report, where the proposed garage and studio would be located would now be imposing upon those setbacks. And so in doing so, I think it was easy to see a case in the sense that, we always strive to have limited disturbance when we develop properties in Carefree. The fact that these were established before our new requirements would allow, actually by right, if it was established today, Maverick Circle would have been that front setback. And so there kind of is the case for the hardship in providing relief. So looking a little bit more detailed, you can see that is actually over 36 feet from the east property boundary. It's located at the end of the driveway, which again sort of makes the most sense in terms of limiting disturbance of the property, as well as proximity garages typically, or even detached garages would like to be, or make the most sense to be located within the proximity of an existing garage. So this sort of shows you sort of the outline of the proposal. The applicant did comply with our required participation requirements. Town staff was visited by 2 residents, neighbors, to better understand the proposal. But the applicant as well as staff did not receive any opposition to the request. So with that said, the applicant would be happy to present or make a few comments to you. Then you're welcome to answer some questions, or would you answer my questions, please? Sorry, this is still my vacation hangover. Ask us questions of staff. Me, I am speaking
I know,
into the
but a little bit
microphone.
closer. There
Ask,
you go.
thank you. Questions of staff or the applicant, and then we'll open the public hearing. So, would you like to go ahead and speak?
Good afternoon.
Get close to the mic, Seth. It's just off.
Is that better? Or is
It's
it
not
I
on.
don't think it's on,
There we go. Oh, whoa, now that's good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And as Stacy submitted,
Gotta get closer to the microphone.
okay.
There you go.
Better?
That's good.
Wow, it seems real loud. And I'm half deaf. As Stacy submitted there, that the variance is what we're looking for. I mean, everything is in the packet that she prepared was phenomenal. So if there's any questions of us or anything that we could answer for you.
The only comment I have is that it is a very challenging lot, to say the least.
It is. It's
Yeah, that whole-
very,
that-
very sloped
That
down
whole area
towards Silver
is-
Saddle. Absolutely.
When I look at it, it looks it's done well. Any other questions?
No. Nice job.
Thank you.
So formally, just open the public hearing, see if the
Yeah.
public has any comments, and then we can move on.
Any public hearing?
You-
I don't see any comments. Any from the public? All right.
So to close the public hearing, you all can make a motion.
Motion to approve?
I second it.
All those in favor?
We all second it.
Motion approved.
Well, could you please, all those in favor?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Perfect.
Congratulations.
Happy building.
All you gotta do now is get to work.
True.
Thanks, Sal.
Now how do you get to the next one?
Okay, so you gotta get out of here. Go pick, did you download the other one?
Tom,
Yes.
you'll need to adjourn this meeting before we begin the next meeting.
Say what?
And we can't start the next meeting until 5:15.
Motion to adjourn?
Oh,
Thank you.
Second it.
all those in favor? Aye.
Here. Let's do that one. Is this one? We better wait till,
How do I get out of this one?
yes. So you have did you download all three of them?
I wanna get out of the one that we're in.
Go close. Close it. There. Is this the one at 5:15? That's the one at 5:30. Where's the 5:15?
Oh, 5:30 there.
You want the 5:15?
Almost to 5:15, yeah.
You need this one, which is the Development Review Board.
So go back again where?
Well, did you download these?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go look here. What's this one? That's it, that's the
Oh,
one you want.
Very good. Thank you. Magic fingers.
And you can actually make this little screen larger. There. How's
Oh.
that? Look at that.
You're all right. I'm
I
keep you
know.
after all. Despite what they've
I
been
know
saying
the
about you.
You better keep making this right. Okay, so we have what, 5 minutes?
Yeah. Somebody ought to mix some Bloody Marys. We got 5 minutes yet, huh?
You're on speaker.
Oh.
Was the wedding tomorrow?
Oh, yeah.
I'm with you.
That's usually
These speakers, they're more than 4 inches from the speaker. Can't hear you anyway.
I know, it's true.
Well, if I want a warm dinner, then we need to give Steve no more than 30 minutes.
Is he on this one? No, it's the third one he's on.
Third one, oh God, the written material alone is what, half the size of the Bible.
approval of the last Development Review Board meeting minutes.
Oh. Anybody got any questions?
Motion to approve.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Onward and upward.
Okay. So agenda item number 2 is case number 2411FW. Looking for the Development Review Board to have a discussion, possible action on a fill waiver request. The location is 36215 North Milky Way, Lot 42 in Carefree Shadows. So let's just jump right into it. If we can, there we go. So specifically the request is to allow for the quantity of fill beneath a building pad to exceed the quantity of cut in order to construct a detached garage. As you're very familiar, we've seen these cases before. The zoning ordinance states that there typically needs to be a balance or more cut than fill under our building pads. But there are certain times and certain conditions that may necessitate additional fill, and the Development Review Board has a purview to consider that waiver. So quickly looking at the location, you can see in our Carefree Shadows subdivision just north of the city of Scottsdale, north of Stagecoach Pass, excuse me. You can see that the property is bordered to a vacant parcel to its south, but to the east and north are single-family homes, as well as to the west is a right-of-way, but as well as additional single-family homes. They all share the same zoning category. Specifically looking at the site plan, and as it was sort of discussed in the report itself, when you look at how the site has been laid out to date, there's limited locations for adding an additional accessory structure. All of the developments have development regulations and standards have been met. So looking again, similarly as to the last case that we looked at the previous meeting, it kind of logically made sense in this location, as well as based on sort of the rest of the development of the parcel. But what came to light during the construction was the fact that there would be significant impacts to the existing driveway. And while at some time that may not seem as that's something that might be typical with development, particularly at existing properties. In this case, this driveway is of a particular material and type that would make it difficult for replacement in terms of matching the existing surrounding. And the material they use is a material that is a higher grade material. And so I think there were concerns that there might be some aesthetic issues, as well as the fact that as you enter to the into the home today, there are no grade changes. Accessibility is easy, and doing so by meeting our guidelines or requirements would necessitate adding some steps. Just so you can see again what the elevations of this is, a pretty straightforward, smaller building, but the views that might be most seen from the right-of-way would be the west view. I think what you can also see is that, and what was stated in your report, is while there is a increase in the fill below, development standards would say it's not a significant increase. And in terms of when we consider these requests, we do consider view vantage points from different properties. And so of the three that are most notable, the property to the east wouldn't be able to see the proposed garage. The property to the north of it would have visibility to it, but based on the house beyond the elevation, or really the perception wouldn't change too much. As well as the property then to the west, that is a garage facing location, looking towards, again, the development, but I think the rising grade is minimal. But most importantly, going through the public process, they did meet the citizen participation requirements. No comments were received, so there didn't seem to be any concerns by the neighboring properties, as well as the HOA did approve this request. So you can see there's conditions for approval attached to your report. So at this point, there is an applicant available to say a few words, and then you're welcome to ask us questions if you like. This is a public meeting, not a public hearing.
Chairperson, Commissioners, my name's Tyler Green. Stacy did a great job of explaining that. We're just trying to set this garage in there without disrupting the access to the existing house. You know, no neighbor objections, HOA approves of it. I don't think it's significantly different than what it would be without the fill waiver, so I'm here if there's questions.
I have a few questions that don't necessarily, oops, you got it, that don't necessarily hinge on the, what is the other building on the site?
There's a main residence, and then this is a garage, accessory garage.
Okay, so this is an additional.
Oh, there's a little casita there
Oh, is
that
that
you
what
see
that
on
is?
the right-hand side, yes.
Yeah, that's a casita?
Yes.
And then it looks like access to the casita comes from Stagecoach on that dirt road?
Now, there's no vehicle access. It's a sidewalk that you're seeing
Oh,
past the front door to the casita.
That's a sidewalk from
Yes.
Stagecoach?
it's a dirt
No,
path.
no, no.
He's talking about
Oh,
south, down south.
yeah. Actually, I never noticed that dirt path. I don't know.
We can't pull anything over on this architect.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I did mention, I think in the report, but if I didn't mention it this evening, the owner does own the lot to the
Oh.
south.
To the south?
Yes.
Aha, okay. Okay, then presumably if he's going to, he or she are going to dispose of it, they would grant themselves an easement for that entry there.
I mean, in the future, yes, if they sold the lot and wanted
Right.
to maintain that access. I think there is access towards the front, but you're right, there is sort of the secondary access. yeah.
And then I'm a little bit confused because it looks like on the project narrative that you filed, you said 18 feet
18, should have
18
been
inches
18 inches.
above grade,
Yeah, we're asking
and
for.
the report says 21 inches, which,
I looked at the grading and drainage plan, so I believe it's 21 inches, but
That's probably accurate.
probably accurate,
Yeah.
okay. And then am I to understand that you started construction before you discovered this?
Yes, we,
How does that happen?
we designed it to meet the town's requirements. When they got out there and moved all the dirt around, they realized that, yeah, this is really gonna affect our access to the house, and we need to change it.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
Mhm.
Chairman.
Again, it's another one of the challenging lots in that area. I think it'll work fine there for you.
Thank you.
you want to
Any other
entertain a
questions?
motion?
Do I have a motion? Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations. Now you can get out your shovels and your pick and go to work.
No, he's already gone to
He's
work.
Yeah, he's gotta finish.
Continue.
Now he's gonna shovel the fill in.
Thanks, Tyler.
Chairman, there's no announcements this evening for the Development Review Board, or were there any for the Board of Adjustment?
So we need to wait 7 more minutes to get Steve warmed up.
Yes,
Well, you need
sir.
to adjourn this meeting, and then we'll start the next one.
Meeting's
yes.
adjourned.
Oh, wait, motion to adjourn, thanks.
Everyone?
Aye.
Aye. All those in favor? Adjourning the meeting?
Good.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you. Right.
More good stuff.
Yeah, I'll get out of here.
Tyler was the architect in our house.
Oh, that guy? Oh, that was. from
I thought I'd seen that name.
Goodwill.
I thought I'd seen that
Oh, okay.
name before, yeah.
Well, he does.
Does a lot of work in the house.
Oh, really? Was it good? Like.
He's like, I call it low drag, nothing.
She's done.
expensive. It's like,
Wow.
he's like,
Huh.
he does a lot of work in desert.
Even with the shade down.
Yeah, he's had some case here before.
Yeah, we've seen him in here before.
Yeah, 'cause the
Yeah,
name
he's
rings,
been here a lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
the name rings a bell.
But I
yeah.
remember his face too.
Yeah.
He just lost his wife
Like when?
like 3 months ago.
Oh, my God. Oh, that's terrible.
That isn't as bad as my landscape, American Desert Landscape.
Yeah, I see their trucks all the time.
Yeah, she just lost her 41-year-old daughter to cancer.
Wow, it's too young.
If I hear any more bad news.
And
Yeah.
she's been doing my landscaping since we bought the place. In fact, she herself, this is 23 years ago now, planted a tree. We call it the Leslie Paloverdi.
Oh, is that her daughter's name?
No, she's in there, her name is.
Oh, it's in her
Leslie.
name, okay.
Call order, meeting order for the Town Retail Center. What do you want to call this? The old, the general term?
For the Economic Development Advisory Board?
Yeah.
Economic.
You got it, Steve.
All right.
Carry on.
All right, Commissioner Cross and members. wanted to just to take some time to kind of go through a discussion that started a while back when Peter provided his revenue projections. And then as part of that, I was talking about various different economic opportunities that we have in the community, one of them being the northeast corner, one of them being the northwest corner, and the other one being town center. And at a high level, you know, for the corners, it's easier to kind of get you a good, you know, estimate on those things. But on the town center, it was looking at more of a higher level estimate. So one of the things that we wanted to do was, and it's kind of twofold, was to kind of get a deeper dive into really how the economics and the retail sales tax viability of the town is, so what those numbers look like. And then what is our, if we were to optimize that and kind of hit in all cylinders moving forward, what does that kind of look like? And at the same time, we're working on a lot of various different things here. It's an RFP, it's talking about, recently a lot of people have been complaining about, you know, uses don't quite fit in on Easy Street. There's a lot of things at play, and so I think the best way to start with that is to kind of talk about it from just the town center's perspective, what we're trying to accomplish with the town center. And then what we can do is look at those things that are impacting our ability to do really what the primary objectives are. One being creating sales tax, and then the other being having a functional town center that everybody enjoys. And so those sometimes can compete with each other based on what people's interest for the town center is specifically. As your economic development director, my primary thing is to look at how we're creating cash flow. I mean, that's my bottom line to some extent, right? But we've got to do it in a way that's going to make sense. And if you can't create cash flow and sales tax if the people aren't behind it, if the leadership doesn't support it, and we haven't really clearly defined the things that we want to do, and then as well as being able to look at our investments that we make, and then are they really leveraging the types of revenue that we'd like to see in the future. And so we're going to have to figure out how ways that we make sure that we make wise investment choices. And so this is kind of where this is starting at. And part of it is economic development's one of those things that when nobody's paying attention to it, you can kind of move things. But then again, people start paying attention to it, and it's really important stuff, and it's things that impacts people's lives. And all of a sudden they see something, and so what we don't want to do is get in a situation, and I don't want to do this, get in a situation where people feel like they weren't part of the process. And one of the things we've heard through some of these things recently is having better engagement, public engagement, making sure that we do things transparently and openly. And so, again, having the Economic Development Advisory Board as a part of that, what I'm going to be asking you guys as part of through this presentation is the things that we're talking about as far as the economics, the things and tasks that we're looking at to try to accomplish the job, and then how we can prioritize those things, and then how we can also involve the public and the best way for us to get the input as we move forward. So those are the things I want you guys to kind of think about, and that's the direction I'm looking for, because as a director of economic development, as staff, I will do my best to treat as a professional. But at the same time, you know, there's people who've been hired, as you guys are, to help provide leadership to the town as far as economic development goes, and planning as well. And in a lot of cases, economic development and planning go hand in hand. And so that's kind of where I'm going to take this presentation, but I wanted to give you guys the foundation. And so again, the purpose of this is really to provide that foundational link. We're going to talk about the optimization of sales tax and really what this town center means. And again, it's for us to provide that foundation for making decisions, evaluation, and prioritization. One of the things that Councilmember Burns had asked me is about when's the next economic development plan ready to start its process. And it's coming up pretty quick here. You know, the council is going to be going into strategic planning exercise with the new council members coming in, as well as the old council members going out. So there's going to be a larger group to talk about what that looks like as these new council members come in. And what we typically do with that strategic plan, and what I like to do is that's how the work plan is formulated. It takes those strategic visions and tries to parlay that into what we're trying to, and how we're going to get that accomplished. And that's where you guys help fit in and understanding that as we start to really get down to more to the nuts and bolts of how to get this done. So, and again, I guess it's just how do we get, you know, really open and transparent, because I think in this community, that's the pathway to success. So what this report does is it provides a snapshot on the environment. And when I did the original analysis, I just looked at a high level, kind of looking at different areas. And what I did this time is I actually went into each development. I looked at each tenant space, and I did a complete analysis that is in real time, the square footages of the types of space and the users that you'll see in the town center. So I wanted to get this as accurate as I possibly could by type of use, so we could see kind of where we're at. The one thing that that we've talked about in the past is when we start talking about sales tax data, I can't get direct sales tax data from the state. There's only one person that can get that, and we can't really get it down to the user type level. And for us to be able to parse it for just these specific areas that we're talking about is very difficult and almost impossible for me to get. So everything I do is based on estimates that I can get, and I think it's pretty close. And so, again, I just walked you through this. This is the retail use map, and the areas in black really help to identify where the concentrations of the retail are. And so what I did is I didn't want to include some of the office projects. I didn't include the banks, even though those potentially could be retail into the future. They've been banks for a long time. They are what they are. And so what I wanted to focus in on was this pedestrian retail and the Carefree Marketplace, which is really more suburban. But one of the things we're trying to do is connect that into more of the pedestrian feel. This also looked at just the existing buildings, but what I wanted to do is include in there the vacant parcels that could potentially be as infill for retail. And there is an opportunity at the corner of Bloody Basin and Cave Creek Road, as well as right next to the town hall, and then right next to Keeler. So we do have some infill along Cave Creek Road. And this really is kind of the heat map that shows you where everything is. And then when you moving forward, this is actually the table that represents that heat map. And so one of the things I wanted you to look at, when you look at wholesale manufacturing and storage on here, if I go back here, I have those as listed as non-conforming manufacturing, wholesale, and storage. And it's important to recognize that, because one of the things that we'll be discussing as we move forward here is the idea that even though these buildings are commercial and they can contain retail, there's a lot of things that aren't allowed within these spaces. And for whatever reason, sometimes these spaces end up having uses that aren't necessarily in conformance with the zoning. And so that does have an impact. But I just wanted you to kind of to see how that was done. And we're here, I spelled them out, wholesale manufacturing and storage. So you can see the square footages. And while they don't look like a lot of square footages, it's when you start adding it up with some other things, it really does have an impact on our ability. And so one of the things I wanted to show you here is looking at these percentages, is I also looked at the sales tax producing, and that sales tax producing square footage versus non-sales tax producing, and take that down to percent. And when you look at retail set areas that are designated for retail, you're going to see at least 75, and in a lot of cases 80% of those areas being for retail use, where we're at 64%. Generally, what you'll want to see in those cases is you'll want to see things that support retail, so retail supporting services, things that bring in traffic. And so one of the things I will say, like, we have a lot of health spas. They bring in a lot of traffic. And a lot of those people will go to a restaurant, or they'll continue potentially to go to the shop next door, or they could be future customers. And so you're driving in that type of retail traffic. And then it's interesting as you start looking at the retail versus restaurant mix. One of the things that we've seen growing is our restaurant base, and it's actually been fairly strong.
Steve, I just have a question.
Yeah.
Of the vacant space, approximately how many units would that comprise?
So the total number of units, and I'll go back.
Approximately, doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah, so one thing I forgot to list on the legend here is the hash mark spaces are the vacant spaces.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to say it's like 8 spaces, in that area there. They're small. One thing I didn't include was the lower level of Los Portales, because technically it's not even really on the market, and it's not even leasable at this point. So not to say that it couldn't be, but I just didn't put that on there. And then one thing, when you look at the little box on here, up that, so there's some two-story, the gallery is a two-story retail, so there's some retail upstairs, so I did show that. And then at Spanish Village, like under Pizzicotta, there's a couple more spaces there. So I just tried to capture all of that. The other thing, when you start looking at the uses, when we look at retail and some of the so we have retail uses that don't generate sales tax, and that would be like the charity shops, so where we have like the boutiques for the animal shelter. Those do not, while they're retail and they bring customers in, they don't generate sales tax. That's one of the things we got to, look at the balance of that and make sure, because it still brings in people to shop, and it is a complementary use to other retail uses as long as they're, kind of fit in with the adjacency of the retail that's complementary. Yeah, all in all, our occupancy and our vacancy is really low. The question isn't whether or not we have occupancy. The question is are we occupied with the right types of businesses? And I will say that we are leaving some on the table by not having and maximizing the total amount of retail that we should probably have if we truly want this to be a retail destination. When we look at the revenues, and the way I approach this is, again, because I have to use estimates, and I took the information and I kind of looked at, okay, what's the average per square foot? And just, again, trying to get as best as close as I could, I think we're in and right around that $300 per square foot average. And it looks like the numbers are lining up with this. These numbers actually do line up with the original projection that we did with Peter's report. So the granular report is actually coming in very closely to where Peter's, or the report we did in the opportunity. So I feel very confident at a high level and at a granular level, we're pretty close to what these revenues do look like today. And then I did add in, when you start looking at that, what if you add in the hotel and resort in the area, which would be Savannah and Hampton Inn, I just aggregated those together and gave an estimate of what those bring to the table as well. And so when you look at the total amount at, we're right around $2.4 million in total revenue for this particular area. So it's a really strong economic center for the town of Carefree in totality. When I back it up, one thing I do want to notice is we look at food store. Food store is a pretty significant amount of, so Bashas' does play a significant role. And one of the things that was asked before the meeting, and I just bring it up, is, what does ACE mean? And ACE does mean a significant portion, probably somewhere between $80,000 to $100,000 in revenue. So it's one of the things when we work in a dynamic environment of trying to use retail sales tax, and we all know that businesses and small businesses and whatever, they come and go. We've just got to be conscious about that. That's just part of the game, and that's the way it works, and we try to do our best to manage that. And so we'll be working on strategies for releasing and re-tenanting those particular spaces.
Well, that leaves that whole corner there between ACE going away, the medical plaza has been empty for quite some time, and now the eyeglass people, he's moving on the other side, so that whole corner is now going to be empty space.
Yes. Yep. And so there's advantages and disadvantages for that particular corner.
Yeah.
You would think you can aggregate all that square footage together, but you can't necessarily.
You got a 2-foot break between ACE
Correct.
and the rest
Yeah,
of
between
it.
ACE and the rest of them. So the rest of those spaces could actually be brought in for one tenant.
Yeah.
But the ACE is on its own island between Bashas' and the adjacent tenant or spaces. They both have 2-foot breaks.
Yeah.
So you couldn't combine that with the Bashas', and you can't combine it with the space next door.
No.
So one of the issues that ACE had with that space is while it's larger, because it's in that inside corner, it has very little frontage. And if you've been to hardware stores, they like to put a lot of grills and all that other stuff, and they sell a lot of stuff out on the front. And so that was one of the limiting factors for that space for ACE.
When people approach you about moving into Carefree, what are the objections? Is it space? Is it parking? Is it volume? Is it traffic? When you try to attract people and they say, no, I'm not interested, what's the rub?
For businesses?
Yeah.
I will say that the biggest issue that is, well, it's the actual local market, right? The demographics of the local market is, you know, it's a little thinner than most areas. And so, for instance, you know, when we talked about the CVS, that's been one of the more difficult things for those types of retailers is they look at demographics within a 5-mile radius. Out here, we have to look at things within a 20-minute radius or drive time, because the 5-mile radius, you have Black Mountain in the way. I mean, it's lower density. And then the other objection is that it's seasonal. You know, so it's hard to run a business in the summertime here. That's the other thing that we hear. So businesses do take a hit in the summertime, and so that's one of the things as we start looking at the town center. I'll be bringing up in a little bit as we move into the presentation. We start looking at our position. How do we deal with seasonality? Is there a way for us to manage that? Because when I ask the seasonality question, or somebody talks to me, I try to say, well, yeah, I mean, seasonality, but Carefree itself, even if we lost 10%, 20% of, it's only a few hundred people. You know, it's not like we're talking a crazy amount, even in Cave Creek. And so what we're trying to do is look at the market space as not just being Carefree or Cave Creek, but it's really the 20-minute commute. And that's how we've been trying to position it as far as what our market really is. And it may be even a little bit beyond that. It's a great question. So as we get back to the revenues, you know, so I wanted to just show you kind of like the differences in the per square foot. You know, I don't think we're really that bad. You know, so when we start looking at typical retail centers, I will say they are probably somewhere in the $400 to $500 square foot. So if you were to look at like the Fry's Center or something like that, or, you know, I would say Carefree Marketplace probably runs at a little higher per square foot and is probably running at a higher level, but it's counterbalanced by other areas that just don't, you know, really along easy streets, just don't generate that level of revenue.
Question, so you're saying that if we were to look at over in Cave Creek, everything south of Carefree Highway from Cave Creek to wherever you want to end it, what are those businesses, what would you guess those businesses are generating per square foot? I mean, did you say 400, 450?
Yeah, I say in a typical retail center like the Fry Center over there
Right.
in Phoenix on the south side. You know, I'm saying that's probably where they're at in general. You know, so they'll have their grocery center or and store, but then they'll also have some other smaller shops, and they'll have some service businesses. So that's kind of and this is just, and actually I got these numbers when I was working with Diversified and Empire on the northeast corner. So it's fairly accurate to what we would expect in the.
For the 300 to 350 or for the 400?
For the 400 to 500.
400 to 500?
Yeah, as a comparison to where those types of centers are.
Okay.
You know,
And-
but they also don't deal with with local only type businesses as well.
Right, but, so you're saying that based on the metrics that you've done here and the results from that, you would say that we're at 300?
That's what I'm guessing. Yeah, I'd
Okay.
say that's a good estimate of where we would be.
But that square footage that we're using includes, as you pointed out before, Bashas'.
Correct.
And Bashas', all of that retail activity is not taxable.
No,
Oh,
Bashas'
it
is taxable.
for-
Yeah.
for-
It's a 2%.
We're at 2 rather than 3, that's right.
Correct.
It was okay. No.
Yeah, so I have to ratchet down Bashas' a little
Right,
bit.
Right.
Because of the 2%.
And you think that we're gonna lose 80 to 100K plus or minus from ACE?
That's my guess, yes.
And do we have a hard move date yet, or?
There's no hard move date, but it's by the end of the year. So,
It's gonna be pretty quick.
it's coming quick, and the challenge, and here's so just people understand and appreciate the challenges that these things bring when it comes to retail. They were courted by another developer or another project down the street. They still have time on their lease for another three years, I believe. And so we got to figure out a way to manage the fact that a property owner is still getting paid, and and there's really in the deal that was done, it's not necessarily I'm not sure ACE is really on the hook for it. So So it's really, it's gonna create an unusual circumstance that we've already been talking to with the broker that represents that to figure out the best strategy forward. Because I know it's not in the best interest for the development to have a vacant space, and so.
So what you're telling me and I'm processing is that A space could be vacant for 3 more years?
I hope not, but
But, I mean,
That's
right
the-
now, the landlord has zero motivation to do anything if,
could potentially, yes.
If-
I mean, we're in those conversations right now to figure out like what's the best way to move forward for the landlord.
okay.
That's just the reality of working in a retail environment.
Isn't that what happened to Albertsons? I think the same
I
thing.
think same thing, they were still getting the rent on it and they just pulled out, you know. So I don't know the specific details of the lease and as much as I can gather. And so I've been in communication with the representative there, who was just hired on to represent, there's a new broker there. And so we'll be getting together in the next few weeks to figure this out.
Okay, thank you.
And then as we walk through this, what I wanted to show was just really what the different levels are if you were to just go up $50 a foot. And then you can kind of see what that revenue looks like. Then I looked at our redevelopment opportunities and some things that are, really on, are doable, I think, within the next, I would say 60 months if we really put our minds to it. And can find ways to find ways to productively put these, redevelop some of these properties. Particularly at the Shell station, we're working with the owner there. That's a new owner, and they're very interested in redeveloping that particular property. The town hall site we've already discussed, which presents a great opportunity. 11 Sundial Circle, which has been sitting for a while.
Is that
Yeah, so it's the
bank next?
the bank's the Wells Fargo Bank, and so. Hopefully what we can do is as we start looking at the town hall site, maybe there's an opportunity to bring that along into the fold as part of how we structure the project. So those are the things we just need to continue to talk about. I'll get into the RFP later, but I'll just say as since we're talking about it now, we were looking at having a workshop session on that. I'm still working on the ability to make sure that we can record the meeting and still have a public meeting, but allow us to have more of just a true sit around the table workshop setting. And it really just comes down to making sure that I can get us on the live feed. And so talked about it with the mayor and with the town administrator, and they're committed to making sure that we can get that done.
I'm sure that the mayor would support any modest capital expenditures to
Yep.
do a workshop kind of setting.
Yeah. It sounds so easy. It's not as easy as you think when you're trying to just figure out. Audio dynamics is always the hardest part. So I looked at the redevelopment opportunities and what those mean, and then the infill as well. And so when we put all these things together, we really have the opportunity to add about another $600,000 in revenue to the town center.
Back up a second.
Yep.
When you say Shell at 400, is that for the gas station, or is that for the dirt behind the gas station? Kind of I guess it's the southeast.
Yeah, so that's their,
Or are you talking about blading the whole thing?
yeah, so that's the net new revenue if they were to expand. So if they were to blade it, build a bigger convenience store, add some different retail product to that, we could probably add another, maybe net 1,000 square foot to that facility. One of the things they've discussed is backfilling that area in the back a little bit to expand that site out, and that would allow them to get a little bit larger building. And so I think there's an opportunity there.
And the owner's entertaining that?
Correct.
And what's your vision for the town hall and 11 Sundial to generate $500 a square foot?
So for me, it would be restaurant, and restaurant generally is going to generate higher per square foot, mixed in with potentially a little bit of retail. So a restaurant could actually generate more than that, but I was looking at kind of what our existing restaurant base, when I aggregate it, some of them do really well per square foot, some of them not so good, or as well as others. So I just took that as an estimate for where we think the restaurant would be. And that's just, but if we go with non-restaurant, it might be a little bit lower than that. Restaurant definitely generates more per square foot than your typical retail in our town center.
Okay, and I'm gonna display my ignorance. Las Portales, that's the two-story underground, above ground?
Yep.
And that, from everything that I've read, they have potentially code violations, and they have some pretty serious infrastructure issues there, don't they?
Yeah, so for Las Portales, obviously there's a lot of maintenance that needs to be completed for if you were to put that building back into full production. When you go back to the Village Center redevelopment plan and the original master plan, one of the concepts they show in that particular plan is to actually deck the upper floor. And so, because that's part of what was in the redevelopment plan, when you look here at Las Portales, that would probably net you another 3,000 square feet of floor space that could be utilized upstairs. That gives you a greater gross leasable square footage. And there are types of developments that you see, like in Prescott, for instance, there's a building they did this, and they used the entire gross now leasable square footage and have multiple shops in there that are kind of centralized around a single, like cash register area. And so there's opportunities for us to be able to maximize that leasable square footage that's on the street level. And so those are for me, I think when I start looking at redevelopment in general, and I'll kind of back up, none of this is doing anything I would call like crazy. This is looking at the existing assets and resources that we have, and we're not talking about increasing densities beyond where densities are in our design guidelines or anything like that. This is just looking at what's been discussed, what's available today, and how can we manage that. Now, if there's decisions to say, yeah, we want to have higher density and we want to go to parking structures, then there's opportunities for us to even go beyond that. I just wanted to show what was reasonable within a reasonable time period under the circumstances that we have.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that clear, that because there's been a lot of discussion about, are we going to continue to have higher density 4-story buildings and all their stuff, and right now that is not the intent.
Is an elevator possible at Las Portales?
An elevator would be able to be built.
Because there's a mall like that in Santa Fe that is a nice combination of retail and food and really works very well.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. And that's the thing. So, and I'll get back, as we get into the presentation a little bit further, that's one of the things that we just need to start talking about is the prioritization of how we want to tackle these things, how we want to approach these things, because they have, that has a property owner that we need to talk to. It has, a lot of people have their own ideas and interests, what they think the best use for that particular building is. And, and it kind of goes back to this idea of, there's a community that has a lot of thoughts and ideas. Maybe it's time for the community to kind of come together in a constructive manner to say, how can we move this along to a better place? And how, is there an opportunity to do that? And there's an opportunity to work with these property owners to be able to do that as well.
How open are the property are the property owners for these? Well, obviously the one property is the town, but the other 3 properties, how amicable are they to a redevelopment concept?
I would say, obviously with the town hall, very amicable. With the Shell station, Las Portales, and with the bank building's been sitting there for a long time. And so it's, I think the question is how can we create opportunity, right? Is there things that we can do that will leverage that conversation to their benefit? So, and in both cases, what both property owners will tell you is that if you were to take the bank building and you were to take it from being a bank and creating a restaurant, and this is actually what the property owner told me is, well, now the parking requirement for this particular site doesn't necessarily meet the parking requirement on site for a restaurant. That's why it's important to be working on the circulation and parking planning, because it does have an impact. And in the case of Las Portales, it was built when there was all kinds of vacant lots all over the place. And so when you start looking at parking, not only do you have the visitor parking, but let's say if you put 15 shops in there, where all those employees, so parking is an issue that we need to work with. And when you look at, and this is one of the conversations that the property owner does bring up, is that Tract A provided parking in town center. The problem is Tract A wasn't legally obligated to provide parking for all these businesses, and it was based on land. So each lot got a certain number of spaces, and so if a particular lot was developed to a certain density, it doesn't mean that Tract A had to provide for those particular parking spaces. And so when the town built the existing parking that you see in and around on Easy Street, that actually matches space per space of what was originally provided in Tract A. And if you look at the existing buildings on Easy Street, the number of parking spaces that would have been allocated by lot actually exist in front of those particular buildings. And so, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't there isn't a problem. And so those are the things that we just need to work through, I think, when we start talking about how we can redevelop some of these particular sites. And so does it make sense to put the elevator in and try to get down to the down floor? Does it make more sense to put more on ground level and try to maximize the ground level, which may have a better opportunity to be occupied and produce more revenue than trying to put something downstairs? So, and I don't have all the answers. I just say those are I'm bringing up the conversation so we can have it.
Yep.
Will you describe for me I don't know these properties, A Development, Gerston, and Baracall?
Yeah, A Development is the developer who built the Galleria, and then it also owns the vacant lot between the Galleria and Town Hall. Baracall owns right next to Keeler's, up on the vacant lot on Cave Creek Road. And then, who's it?
Gerston?
Oh, they're the ones that own the property at Bloody Basin and
Oh, the corner.
the corner there, Cave Creek Road, where they tried to put the storage. And they're willing to work with the town. They're very open to try to figure out a way to develop that property. So they're anxious to Baracall. It's very difficult. A Development, he's a developer. I've talked to him. Definitely has interest in figuring out a way to make that property productive. So one of the things I wanted to do as we start looking at the opportunity is kind of, when we work in economic development, I know Stacy deals with this in planning, everybody and their brother has an idea of how this stuff needs to get done. But we got to come to a point. We got to come and bring it to a head, and then we got to prioritize, pick and choose, and move forward on what's going to be the best way for us to utilize our resources. And I feel we're kind of at a moment now with the three new council members coming in. There's been a lot of discussion about economic development and opportunity moving forward, with the northeast corner as being one of the things, or at the northwest corner. And again, my job is to try to maximize that revenue. And so, but I want to do that in a very thoughtful way. And I think we're now here to where we really start needed to bringing this conversation to a broader audience. And so these are kind of, when you look through the report, I made a bunch of recommendations, and what I did is at the end, I kind of distilled them down into these 6 categories and 6 topic areas. And so, and then what I'll do, I'll just kind of go through each one of these real quick, or not quick, but, and one of the things that's been brought up is, we've had a lot of new people moving into the community, and obviously we got 2 new members here right here. One of them is going to be on council, and people come from different places, different perspectives, and different ideas and thoughts about what we're going to be when we grow up. And then I balance that against with somebody who's in their 90s and has lived here for the last 40-something years, and their vision for what Carefree was and what it could potentially still be. And so we just need to kind of start looking at how we balance what that position is. And the last time we went through this exercise was really in 2015. And so I think it's always good to start looking at what your position is. And your position really is where do you fit into the marketplace? We've talked about this in the past, and one of the challenges for Carefree is I moved here in 1978, and it was more like Sedona. You left Phoenix, you drove for about an hour or so, you didn't pass anything but desert and squirrels and vultures flying around, and then you got to a place and it was cool, and it was really geared towards tourists with the sundial and all that. In the meantime, a lot of stuff has developed between here and there over the last few decades, and so we do find ourselves in a very competitive market when it comes to retail, both in our own existing market space within, we'll say, the 30 or 40-minute commute and in the metro area, but we're also competing with other places that offer Sedona and Bisbee and other areas where people are getting that tourist fix, and us still not maybe being the drive-away destination may not even be the same. And so I think at some level, we've identified that, we've created a little bit of an identity crisis. And are we a tourist town built around a garden and a sundial, and we try to bring people here, or are we, and if you look at our business mix, it really reflects that. We have a lot of seasonality, a lot of businesses that are geared towards tourists. But at the same time, we've seen a new mix of businesses moving in, like the bike shop, that are really geared toward, I guess, tourists from a rental perspective, but really the idea is that you're selling bikes in a local market, and they're expensive. And so that is now a move and a shift towards being able to cater to the market, the general market, and we'll call that the 20 to 30 minute market. And so those types of businesses are open all year round, 6 days, 5-6 days a week, and it's more your typical retail business. And so those types of businesses generally will create more revenue because they're just open longer periods of time. So that's one of the things as we start to move forward that could maximize our ability to create more retail and to create more per square foot retail. But it also is what does the average Carefree resident want? Do you want an environment of tourist seasonal business with drive up traffic? Some people are talking about tour buses still coming here. Or do you want an area where, within 30 minutes you have 700,000 people, and that's the market that comes into Carefree on a more regular basis. And so as we start to look at what that position is, this also comes into the dynamics of the area. We've talked about this being a main street. We've talked about it being local only. We've talked about it being, people like to see the shops roll up and close up at 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. Everywhere between there to people who want us to utilize the pavilion and have rock and roll shows. So how are we going to utilize this space not only for the retail perspective, but how does it fit in with the community? And those two things can be at odds with each other, but it's going to be really, it's going to have an impact about how the retail future looks, depending on how we really want to utilize this town center, the gardens, as kind of the downtown for the Carefree market, for Carefree. And the role of the gardens is, I think, it plays a big role into that. And again, this, I think, comes down to the idea that we really just need to start gathering public input on that. There's so many new people here. There's so many people who do utilize the gardens as a public park, and that's the way they view it. And so how are the gardens, and how do they feed into the retail? What's the value they bring as part of being as a retail asset? And so as we look at that, I think we just really need to hone in and figure out what that vision really is, or I want to say vision because we have the vision of a village concept. It's really about what's the position in our marketplace, how do we see ourselves, how do we want to be perceived, and what kind of customers and who is the customers that we really want to focus in on to come to Carefree. Review and recommend zoning ordinance. I bring this up because I don't know how much of an impact this actually really has on the retail environment, other than it helps create a more cohesive environment if we can look at and have better design standards. And I think that is important. The other aspect being, as we start looking at zoning changes, are there things that we can do that make a better, again, going back to that position, we have the view that's here. We have new residents moving in. They're going to be permanent customers of the town center. They were going to add value. Do we look at other parcels, and we've did through the redevelopment plan the opportunity to bring more types of retail or residential in, within the densities that are allowable. And what we do know is that, mixed use areas and retail areas do well when people live there. And if you look at all the malls, they're all converting to put retail or residential in them now, because residential is going to help drive that level of type of retail. And so the other part of that is then, as we talked about through the circulation planning, connecting the town center to the residential base at a pedestrian level and making it easier for people to walk in and out of the town center, ride their bike, whatever it is. But when we look at the zoning changes, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is where we are on that. On the positioning stuff, I haven't really had a lot of conversations, but I know Stacy and we want to touch on where we are as part of looking at the zoning ordinance.
Sure. Well, first I would say that, yes, I think together, the zoning ordinance does look at physical changes to the environment. It looks at aesthetic changes to the environment. But it also does affect uses in the environment as well. So I would add that there is sort of that level of, interest in the sense that there is sort of that collaboration with the economic side of things that zoning can have some influence on. I think that you all are aware through the recent adoption of the budget, we are going to be updating the zoning ordinance as a whole. And so now Town Center is somewhat of a subset of that, so we will be looking inclusively to update that ordinance. A lot of it is based on sort of how the general plan is received, and hopefully it's well received. Because as we kind of talk through the process, it does set up a lot of the framework as to how we evaluate the zoning ordinance that we have today. The zoning ordinance has to also look at federal, state mandates and things like that. We do have to be able to be sure that we are compliant as a statutory community. But I would say that it touches upon economic development, because once, we want to have an inviting, we want to have an environment in Town Center, but we also have to remember that part of this vitality and economic development is also the other aspects that we have other commercial in town as well. So it's trying to kind of find and marry all of that together. So it will be an extensive process. It will take time. The general plan took 19 months. 4 of those months was getting it and having it on the ballot, the waiting period to actually have it ratified. So it could be a year process. I think we've learned that, as Steve has touched upon, engagement will be key. Objective engagement is what will be making this move forward and make us ultimately have a successful update to the ordinance. So there's definitely different layers to it, but I can go on talking about it, all the details or aspects of it, and answer any questions that you might have. But there obviously is a key component to accomplishing the things that Steve is outlining.
And particularly now, the thing to look at for Carefree, we had the opportunity to be in Prescott last weekend, and they had the town garden and a hotel, and then they had a big art show in there at the same time, and that was quite well covered until it started to rain, that funny stuff that comes out of the sky that we never get. But to overlook the whole thing, I was gonna bring up my wife and I live here, and she's lived here since the mid-60s in Arizona. And my father used to live in the west side of Black Mountain back in the mid-60s. And coming out here, and she says the enjoyable part about living here, if everything's around here, you don't have to put up with all the additional traffic to get to some of the other stuff that's going on throughout the whole area here and the way it's changed in the last 23 years that I've lived in Carefree. And so that's part of what should go into this whole thing here, of what some people are looking for, what we need, and ask some of that up to maintain that element of just stay here, without traveling all the way down to God only knows where, and putting up with all the idiots driving up and down Scottsdale Road and whatnot. But that's my opinion on this.
Yeah, no, it's a valid opinion, and it's one of the things we've talked about is, you can get that Arizona experience without driving, hundreds of miles to get to it. It's definitely a valid, as we start looking at what our position is, definitely a valid a point to make.
There's a lot of dreaming that has to be done in here yet, but you've touched on most of the points that still need to be amplified on and talked seriously about.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you have a high level of discussion, right, of what it is we really want to kind of see from a higher level, and where we fit into the position. But then it gets down to the nitty-gritty details of, when we start looking at the environment, does it really match what that is, and how do we get those things to reconcile with each other?
What do you perceive, Stacy, as
maybe the three largest problems with the zoning code that would spawn us to undertake an update?
Well, first of all, I believe that since I've been here in the last 10 years, I've made updates either based on statute requirements, as I mentioned before, other things that we have found had been problematic that needed to sort of be remedied, that sort of made sense in terms of, because we have to remember with zoning, it's universally applied. It's like sometimes you have to be careful, like you think you're going to fix one problem, but you don't want to create other problems elsewhere. But in any case, really there hasn't been a comprehensive update since 2004, and that was when Gary Neese was the planning director. And so 20 years, it's time. I would say, one of the biggest things that we need to address is signage. There are definitely, not that we're non-compliant, but there have been significant changes in signage, particularly temporary signage, that we need to include and revise in our ordinance today. And I think we actually had, we were trying to encourage more creative signage in terms of potential comprehensive signage plans. Haven't seen as much of that as we had hoped, so maybe there is that interplay trying to understand, the revitalization aspects of town center. But in any case, I would say that's one of the biggest. One thing that's also something to consider, particularly as we have these infill properties, we may want to consider a different approach to our zoning ordinance. We have a very conventional, we basically comply with kind of Euclidean zoning. There's form-based zoning, and so there's ways to consider how development.
Will you tell me what Euclidean-based
It's
zoning
just,
is
it's the typical, well, it's the traditional zoning that you see in a zoning ordinance. For example, you have zoning categories, and these zoning categories have very specific development standards associated per category. A form-based approach, and you can sometimes even consider a hybrid, and I think now I'm getting into the weeds of actually, I think this is kind of the discussion that would happen when we kind of have, as we kind of all agreed through a lot of, through the general plan update process, is sort of the stakeholder driven approach to updating the ordinance. But typically when you have a lot of properties with infill, sometimes you want to consider a type of zoning that's not so much based on the kind of use, but it's based on the form or the design or the physical aspect of the environment. And so it kind of addresses more the, again, the built environment of what something looks like, not necessarily what something will actually be. I think that's something that we need to kind of look at. I would say that it's particularly in an environment that a lot of times, we come to you, not everything fits so perfectly, into the framework, particularly of, a downtown environment. I think maybe the last major thing I think is important to consider might be open space, in the sense that the general plan has sort of provided a framework for the importance of open space, pursuing open space. It has categorized open space. I don't think the zoning ordinance responds to open space, I think, as effectively as it could. I wouldn't say that it's ineffective. Please don't take it out of context. But I think as we're considering moving ahead with the value of properties and what may potentially become what we thought was developable but could be open space, do we have the assurances in our ordinance that that can move ahead? And as other properties develop in town, a lot of communities have open space requirements. So I would say those are some of the major things, as they align sort of with some of the issues that Steve has identified in town center, particularly use issues.
Yeah, which is one of the things why I follow this up with code enforcement as kind of a segue, because they really do go together. And code enforcement isn't necessarily just for the zoning ordinance. I mean, code enforcement is also for the town code and the building code, right? So those are the things we look at. But as we look at the zoning code and the zoning ordinance, you know, it was created, how long ago?
Well,
It was updated?
2004 was updated.
It
I
was
mean,
updated in
yeah, we've had
2004,
zoning
so we're 20 years beyond, and there's been a lot, you know, the town's grown, has changed. And there's, you know, when you start looking around, there's certain categories that just maybe don't make sense, when we start looking at uses. And so how we look at the zoning categories and how we look at uses, or how we approach that, is gonna be something that I think Stacy's trying to address, is that it isn't perfect today. And I will say the other side of it is because it's not as cut and dry as you think it is, it makes enforcement a little bit more difficult. And so, for instance, you know, when we start looking at the biggest complaint I get of any tenant is the Free Spirit Gallery, which is right next to venues. By far, the biggest complaint I get probably at least 2 or 3 complaints a week about what we're doing about that. And, you know, and it's a tough situation because, you know, they're operating with a business license.
With or without?
Without.
How can that be permitted? I'm just,
Yeah, so these are the things that we're working through. You think you just go out and ding people, and maybe there's a way to do that. And I know it's created a lot of frustration for a lot of people, but so.
just out of interest, like, do we not have penalties in the law for violations?
So for the business licensing side, those are the things that we can go through, and one of the things that we're looking to do is why, how this.
Do we currently not have penalties in the law, in the ordinance, for violations of the ordinance?
So for the penalties, there are by law in there, and they are enforced through the court.
Okay,
Yeah.
we own the court.
I'm the economic development guy. I'm just bringing these issues up.
But it's tough, right? You're trying to find the balance of working in a community, working with a business community. I'm not trying to say that it's justified by any means, but.
Does that argument work with MCSO when they stop me for speeding?
You can give it a try.
You gotta work with the community, you've got to understand
Well,
and
I think
sympathize.
sometimes things that seem black, like zoning, I think a lot of times things that seem black and white sometimes aren't quite. Sometimes there's a bit of gray there. But I would say then too, also kind of touching upon a little bit what Steve has said, respect to all of these zoning and enforcement requirements, and is the fact that I think that we mention it, is that there's new residents, there's sort of a new or renewed sense of public engagement. I think there might be a new sense of people's sort of ideas and expectations that would be interesting, and that why we have to figure out how to incorporate these things. It seems so black and white, but as we you'll see as we go through the process.
It's a little difficult. So, and I'll be, for instance, you know, the way that we do business licensing is all just done on spreadsheets. And so you got one person who takes it in, you get it in there, and a business doesn't even come and get a business license, and they're out there doing their business. How do you know if they've got a license or not? And so somebody has to go back and check on the spreadsheet and reconcile it and everything else. And so not only is it just our business licensing, but all of our permitting and all of our plan review and everything is done analog. And so next, in September, I believe, there's actually going to be a presentation made to council to update that to an actual system run by, you know, on a computer with software and everything else. And so what this will allow us to do, it'll have like a business license module to it, is that hopefully we can start looking at all of these things that we can start analyzing that. Because the one thing that you need to do when you start enforcement is, you know, and I just believe in this, is, and I think the town, you just can't have selective enforcement. You know, you got to have a method, means and methods as to why you're going about it, and it applies equally across the board to anybody who's violating. And so, again, I can't with definition tell you who does and who doesn't necessarily going across the board looking in has a business license. And so I can onesie choosy check them, but for us to be able to start really defining that, I think we just need a better means and methods to be able to do that. And so these are the issues we start to think about as we start looking at enforcement. And there's the obvious ones, right? But then there's not the so obvious ones. There's the ones we notice that are in town center, but then there might be things that are happening outside of town center that I'm not even got my eye on or aware of that's happening in maybe some of these office buildings. So we're just really trying to get to the bottom of it. And one of the things that we've done is we're actually working with Rural Metro, who gets to go into these spaces every year to do a fire inspection. And so what we've asked Rural Metro to do is to start asking these questions, because by law, you're required to put a business license on your wall and your certificate of occupancy. So on their checklist now, they ask, do you have a business license and do you have a certificate of occupancy? That comes back then to code enforcement, that comes back then to the building safety department. Because every space, any tenant space and any occupied space has to have a certificate of occupancy for that specific user, if it's rented, for that specific user, for that specific space, and the occupancy goes with the user, not with the space. And so what we're trying to do is get everybody up to speed on that. And one of the things that we've done to help new businesses coming in to make sure that they comply with that is that we're now doing upfront, I want to say they're courtesy inspections, people still pay for them, but it allows the building safety person, John Gunn, to go out there and give them an update, say, hey, by the way, you're good to go, your use is fine, your certificate of occupancy will issue a new one, or no, you're doing some electrical work, you need to get somebody to come in, show us that, you need a permit. So we're starting to get better at identifying it ahead of time. And so it's going to take a little bit of time for us to make sure that we get a good database of information. Who's got the right CFO? I mean, it's just, and I will say that our compliance levels have gone up over the last year since we've been implementing that. I don't have the percentages. I need to talk to Ryan over, but he said it's pretty significant that businesses are now starting to comply with that. And it really comes down to building safety and making sure that people are walking into safe places and that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing in those spaces. So it's,
it's absolutely vital that we have a vibrant, economically vibrant town center. But I think we can also learn from the mistakes of our neighbors. I understand about 20 years ago, Hay Creek was aggressively moving to increase its business base. And the residents were promised again and again that Carefree Highway would not become Belleville. Well, I think it after Belleville is Belleville. And I think that's the thing we want to guard against. That's kind of the most special thing about Carefree. We want it vibrant, but we don't want Belleville.
yeah. I agree. And, you know, it's just one of those things where, you know, where's the level of vibrancy to the level of serenity? You know, I think both those things are the vibe of Carefree, you know, and so, you know, Gary kind of uses you know, we're the beach town and the desert's our ocean, right? Is that the vibe that we're looking at, is to have, you know, something has some level of vibrancy where people want to come to, and there's a reason why they come here, and the desert is a part of that. But at the same time, it provides that level of serenity, so. But design guidelines, you know, it's one of the things as we look at the zoning, I mean, that is a zoning code, in the design guidelines and development standards are a part of that. And, you know, I personally, and this is just me, but I personally think we should take the hotel and deconstruct the process and say, what didn't work, right? Did it go through the process? Did it check all the boxes? Did it do everything that the process was to do? And maybe that's the way that we look at this as a litmus test of, you know, I look at how the process was done on the hotel, and I think town staff and, I mean, everybody did everything exactly the way that they're supposed to do. You look at the materials on the buildings, you look at how everything done. It meets the code. It meets the design guideline standards. It does all of those things. So are there things that we can change? Are there things that we should look at? I always think it's interesting to look at something that maybe some people have objections to. And it's not about necessarily the people involved and how it was done. Is the process something that we just need to look at and examine? And I think it's important that we do that. Because I will tell you, I know people have objections to this, but I can look at other things in town center and tell you, I think they're 100 times worse, and they need a heck of a lot more help. So, and so as we look at even redevelopment, or we look at the RFP that we're doing for town hall, we have the opportunity to create. And I think where we can do that, where we have the best opportunities to create those standards, where we have the greatest control, we should focus on that, because we will set the tone. to assess the physical infrastructure, we kind of talked about a lot of this stuff. And this is really looking at the physical environment. And so when you look at, position as being one thing, your physical environment is your product. And just because we say we want to be something, just because we think we are something, it doesn't mean that you are. I can put a Toyota badge on my Jeep and it's still a Jeep, right? So the Toyota's going to last a heck of a lot longer than that Jeep's going to. So yeah, there's Jeep people over here. I got Jeep people over here too. I'm a Jeep guy. So, so that's just the way we got to look. So one of the things that I want to do, and I could talk to them blue in the face about these buildings, and I think it's time that we start really looking at the inventory of our commercial buildings and things that generate retail. And I think it's good for this group to start looking at it. I think it's good for the community to start looking at it and discussing it. And this isn't about going in and pointing fingers and making people feel bad about the way they run their buildings, or it's just giving honest assessments about what these things are. Do they fit in with what this town should be? Are they market worthy? We have an expectation of what the carefree market is from a retail perspective. Some people think it's super high end. Some people think it's a roll up the street tourist town, but we've got to find what that is, and we got to make sure that this environment reflects what that position and what that brand is. And I will tell you, you get a lot of criticisms for the Hampton, to being a Hampton brand. I'm going to tell you, brand reflects neighborhood. And if you walk down the street, down Easy Street, that's not a high-end brand. It just isn't. And if that's what we want, then we got to focus on what that high-end brand is. If you want to have a Ritz-Carlton or whatever that is, or we're happy with having a Hampton brand here. These are the conversations we need to have. And so I'm not trying to say one way or the other, but as an economic development guy, I'm trying to figure out the best way to move forward. But the best way to move forward is for us to come to some level of consensus about what that is. And looking at
Steve?
the...
I was going to say, to get to that point, what we're talking about here, to envision how this is going to look like and talk to the people out here at their buildings, we really got to have that vision of what we're going to consider ourselves to be, presenting ourselves in the market. And I don't think we have that. I know you're talking about this right now, but I don't think we quite got that yet.
I agree.
Yeah, and I can hear that from when people come to these meetings and talk just about the general plan, they're not in agreement with a lot of things. So it's like you got hundreds of people that come and there's no common thing, but we do find some things such as the serenity you mentioned or open spaces. But if we're talking about the economic development, somehow that's got to fit in there, and I don't think we've actually even gotten there yet. So it's like almost having a vision statement. We learned that in our classes, to have that and then know what we're looking towards doing and everybody being in that same space. But I don't think we've done that. I'm
agree.
not clear on it.
Yeah, and that's what as far as, having the Economic Development Advisory Board is the first step in being able to have these conversations. How we take this to the next level and start integrating that into community conversations or whether stakeholder conversations. When we did the signage, we had a stakeholder group, and that stakeholder group kind of morphed as it went through time to address maybe two different issues that was related to signage. But to Stacy's point, we had an objective approach of people who had multiple interests in this community talking things through and coming to consensus. And I think that's where I would like to head in this particular conversation. And my conversation with some of the council members, I think they would like that. Even members with the community, I think there's a strong interest to have those levels of conversation. And so those are one of the things I would like to get your input on, because it sounds like, I think you guys would like to get that feedback too, right? I think that all of us leadership would like to do that. And so what I want to do is create, kind of get that feel from you that that's the direction we should head. And then really kind of what are the things we want to focus in on? How do we want to do this? Do we want to have groups that look at specific issues? Do we want to have a larger group that looks at multiple issues? Because when you start doing that, you're asking people to take a lot of time, and so, but when you ask people to focus on a specific issue, it may be a few meetings, they've contributed and they can move on. So those are the questions, kind of get your thoughts and feedbacks on those things.
But I would like to jump in and add, though, when we talk about this conversation of vision, and it's very important, and I don't discount the opinion of what is it. We do have vision. I mean, we have established vision in the general plan. I think and we've established vision in the Village Center Master Plan. And so what it is, we've been building upon this idea even as we got to the redevelopment plan. Now, I agree when we start talking about things like branding and marketing and things like that, that's kind of I would say kind of a subset of sort of those plans or that vision. But I would look back at some of those documents and say, if you think there's something missing there that, because I do think that in my comment, I wasn't as complete about it as I thought about it more, though, is people have certain expectations now. I think there's a certain idea of what people think Carefree Town Center should be. I think it's diverse, but there is a lot of new blood that's come up, and I think there's sort of an idea of, and there's one sense of what they think the vision of what the town center should be, but there has been discussion and documentation of, and, really kind of working towards, figuring out what that vision is. So I think sometimes it might not be necessarily that we need to create a vision, but it might be looking back and picking apart and seeing if this is, still that collective vision, or if that is, how do we kind of move that forward? And moving it forward is with the zoning ordinance and design guidelines. And we do have design guidelines. But again, I go back to what is the expectation, and is there something about those design guidelines that could be better, that could be has a different idea of what it needs to be, a whole, things to that effect. So, because I worry about like starting from scratch, because we really have been building upon what we think Carefree is and what Town Center is as a whole. And so, I don't like to see those efforts sort of lost.
Yeah, I don't think we would start over, but I think revisiting it is a great way to put it. And I agree with you. We have a lot of renewed interest now from the town. We can see that.
Totally agree.
People,
Yeah.
Becoming town council members or sitting up here with, with us.
Yeah.
I mean, and they have their opinions now. And I think since we already went through that whole exercise the last 19 months, I really think this is going to be a perfect time to really refine that, because you are going to have people attending now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
And I want to
You can tell by the great turnout
Yeah.
tonight.
This is not an exciting meeting,
yeah.
but wait till they start coming. Wait till they start coming.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the point. Some of this noise that we've just had in the last year has been reactions to things that people had the opportunity to provide input to. They didn't. Something resulted from that, and then they objected to it. I think
But I
that
think now we have the people that are going to be here and show up, I think more so than maybe you had in the past.
my evidence
Yeah.
lay in front of
Well,
you,
okay.
my dear.
You're going to see it. I think you will. I think everybody's taking a break. It's summertime too, but I think you're going to see it, especially with new council members, and that's my feeling, that's my projection, but yeah, I think we will see it. I know what you're saying. You're right. We have people that come
Okay,
and
we'll
and
just
shoot
see
it
next
down.
year this time.
Yeah,
Who
okay.
will be able to say, I
we could
told you so.
we could do a bet.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But yeah.
We have a vision that was articulated in the general plan, but how do we translate that vision into the economic development
Yes.
plan?
Right.
So it's a staged development of, no pun intended, of where we're going with this. We know what it means for the whole town, but what does it mean in terms of economic development?
Yes. Right.
There's some easy things. Nobody wants a big box store. That clearly conflicts with the vision. But how does that then translate into more specific things that makes the town center what we want it to be economically, but also consistent with our vision of Carefree?
and I think, and I don't want to confuse, and I think people get confused with vision with position. So, I don't know if you guys have marketing backgrounds, if you took a marketing class, the first thing they teach you are the 4 Ps of marketing: product, price, promotion, and position, right? And so a vision is your guidance. That's where you're always looking towards, how you're going to set your goals. It's how you come down to your objectives and strategies. A position, though, is more about where you fit in, right? How do we fit in with that vision? How does our vision fit in? It's really more about the fit and feel of the community as it relates to the market space. And that market space has multiple customers: Carefree residents, visitors who come in, tourists. I mean, so how are we fitting into that? Then when you look at the other Ps, it's like we're talking here, this is the product. Is your product matching your position? And so at every given time, we're always working on these things. We're never stopping, but I think it's good at every once in a while to check back and say, hey, is it working? Is this the vision that we really want? Do we need to pivot a little bit? How, you know, and so for like, even with the buildings, I mean, you can say Spanish Village has been revitalized. Athens came in and took a space that wasn't being utilized and is utilizing it. And so we've seen that there's a success story here as it comes to creating that type of, there's an opportunity for us to improve the product. How do we continue to build upon that? To make sure, but it, like you said, it all has to reconcile, right? You know, as we're looking at our position, is our product fitting in with that? And, you know, and then promotion, that's what we've got Madison, and she talked all about that at the council meeting. So, but promotion has to then you start looking at, okay, who are our customers? What are the customers we want to see based on the marketplace and position we see ourselves in? That's how it all fits together. And if they come here and it ain't what you say it's supposed to be, you just lost a sale, right? I mean, are they coming back? Maybe, maybe not. That's the part that we need to figure out. So if we're going to be this charming, cute town and somebody walks in and I know we pick on Los Portales, but somebody walks in, is it that? I don't know. You know, that's with the conversations we have, and I'm not really trying to pick on anybody, but, you know, does that hit the mark? Or does anything else hit the mark, you know, or whatever it is? And that's what we got to figure out. And so we'll continue to keep working on these things. Like, you know, with Clint, the council, Clint Miller, we fixed up the landscape islands here. We're really trying to just do the small, low-hanging fruit. We're working on alleyway projects. We're trying to clean up the edges. The property owners have been really working on that. And so I was just talking to Joe Gimmel, and they're getting ready to repaint their building. And so there's a lot of things that are just they're small things, but they all add up. And you're always small, and you're always moving, but you always have to come back, and you always have to get a little bit of reassurance from the people that your customers are. Are we doing the right thing here? One of the things that I've talked to you about is the building improvement program, where we provide matching funds. And the idea is that we can take CIP dollars that we have, and because we're in a redevelopment area, we can actually utilize that money and put it in a public-private partnership. And so I've looked at programs throughout the state that I'd like to model, and there's none that really specifically I think are like us, but a lot of them focus a lot on storefronts and working directly with store owners. I think our issue is working more with property owners and working with buildings and looking at full building solutions. And so instead of looking at it as a storefront program, more of a building improvement program, I think to the point we talked about, there's other issues other than just facade problems. You know, we want to fix sidewalks and parking lots, and, you know, look at adding shade structures for, you know, people who are walking up and down the street if it's on Easy Street. I think there's things like that we also want to include. And so some of the programs I looked at had 50-50 matches with less money. I would rather look at more of a 30-70 match and kind of put the money up there so we can try to see it the best we can to leverage more investment. You know, obviously these are just some parameters we'll put out there. This is a conversation we'll have further on this program. I do have a draft of it that I'm almost completed with, and so I'll be bringing that back to you guys specifically to get your thoughts on it. You know, we could probably carve out. I've been slowly looking at my budget and how, you know, adding money in from the budget, and I've always kind of marked $50,000 to $60,000 to do things like this. And we've used it to do other things, like we use the money to do the landscape and stuff like that. But now it's, can we get these buildings upgraded? And the cool thing about a program like this, when we start talking about design guidelines, you can have a review. You can say, hey, at minimum, you've got to meet these standards. If you want money, there's standards that we expect that you to meet. And so those are the things that we can start looking at as we make investment or we put dollars into it. We can kind of set that tone. One of the things that, you know, Gary and I have been going back and forth is we do something like this as an open application versus an annual submittal, and you do a project. There's pros and cons. We don't have to discuss those right now. But the other aspect of this program, I wanted to also to look at building safety issues. If there's things that we can do to help improve the building safety, I would, for health and safety and welfare, I think we should look at that, because it may be the inhibitor to why the building's not being occupied properly. Oh, sorry, it's long. Yeah, evaluate necessary capital improvements and investment strategy. You know, the big part of this is the sign of circulation and parking, and we've touched on a lot of this already, so I'm not going to go too much into detail on this. But as we start looking at our investment strategy, and this is really what this is, when you look at your capital funding and your capital planning, especially for a town center, it's an investment strategy. You got money, you're gonna apply it to it. Some things are gonna have a direct return. If we look at the RFP process, and we looked at what we could do for town hall, we can calculate a direct return. We look at comprehensive signage plan. I can't tell you that directly is related to a project that's gonna create sales tax, but we still have to evaluate those things. And so one of the things that I wanna start working on is working with you guys, or how we can make this happen with, that allows us to have more eyes and thoughts about the process for us to evaluate various different things and how we do capital planning and how we spend money on things that we put towards the town center. And so if it's still just me bringing it to you and just being transparent and getting input, we'll do that. But I just want to let everybody, it's a transparent process, and it should be. It'll also be done when we start creating the capital plan. And so what I want is to make sure that that capital plan has been kind of vetted with the idea that it's really to return, in a lot of cases, from my perspective, return on investment to, which is sales tax. Again, for me, it boils down to that. And then if it solves other issues, and that's how we evaluate it, creates sales tax, and it also makes it a prettier place and people are happier with it, then we focus on those and we prioritize that way. And this includes, you know, the gardens, utilization of the gardens and the pavilion. And so, and then the big one is the desert gardens. And, you know, they're, what, 20-something years old now? It seems like they're new, but they're not. And 20 years is a long time. And I think it means a lot of things to a lot of people. I think some people think it's tired and it could use the sprucing up. Some people think they're great. And their ideas are all over. Some people think it's a dog park. It's all over the place. And as far as what people's public opinion is, and I really do think at this point in this juncture, we should start really evaluating what it is we want to do at the desert gardens. And if we do ever have a stakeholder group that is dedicated to something, I think we really should do that. And I think we should do it sooner than later, and have a really open conversation on what the gardens look like. And I've had conversations from people saying we should get rid of Easy Street and integrate the gardens right straight into all the businesses and around there, and we should figure out parking another way. It's you know, from everywhere from tearing it out to putting parking in there. I mean, that is really the gambit of what people think that area should be. You know, the town's put a lot of investment into it. We spent a lot of money maintaining it, but is there a way for us to think about the future over the next 20 years of what the gardens really mean? And that really kind of comes into this positioning conversation as well. I like them. I think but maybe there's more we can do. So, and again, we've talked a lot of these discussion and recommendations, and so, you know, for me, you know, I think at this point it's just kind of like, you know, our working relationship as staff and board members, and trying to get public engagement, and how you guys, you know, looking through these specific issues. You already asked a lot of great questions. If you have any additional questions, but I'd like to figure out how we can work better together and getting input on this and what your thoughts are, to be able to accomplish that.
Very good.
I guess you raised a bazillion topics here.
Yep.
And
Times two.
right, and I guess my problem is, I need you, the staff, somebody, to at least, and maybe you can use it or think about next year's economic development plan, but somehow take this, make some priorities, and lay out a roadmap. Because we can't do all of this. It doesn't seem to me that we can do all of this. And some of it's gonna be over here, maybe, because you're gonna have a consultant that's gonna disappear for 3 months once you hire them. I assume that, you know, there'll be a work plan and we'll look at that and then they'll disappear. But you know, are we gonna move forward with enforcement on just what we have right now? And what does it take, that I imagine it's a commitment from the mayor and the council, along with town management, to say, yes, we're going to enforce this and we're going to stand up and take the heat from it. But we're going to, and look, yes, I want to be as equal enforcement as you can be, but you can't let the guy that just stuck up Circle K off because you didn't catch the other guy that stuck up Circle K.
Right.
I mean, you got him, you know? So, but we need this somehow to be in the form of a plan that might be a 2-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 4-year plan. But we need something to get your arms, to me, I need something to get my arms around, to better understand how we are getting there.
Yeah, and I think Commissioner Burns, I think it's a great thought, and it's kind of a two-way thing, you know. And what I wanted to do is listen into what the questions are tonight, right? What are the things that are of interest in the short run? What are the things that we really need to focus on? You guys have asked some great questions, and it helps me formulate to what those prioritizations should be. And so what I would ask is, you know, just looking at the laundry list of things, understanding, you know, that the goal here is manyfold, but for me, it's primarily looking at how do we, you know, maintain revenue and how do we increase revenue. You know, kind of what your top 3 issues are, the things that you'd want us to focus on, or you'd want that you think are the most important things for us to be focusing on as it relates to the town center. And then the other side of it is that council is going to be going into this strategic planning session. I also wanted to utilize this opportunity to be able to put information out there so they can use this as a backdrop. We have one of the new council members here to be able to have that conversation. And that kind of dovetails into the 2-year work plan process, which I would, you know, we usually start off and kick off in the fall.
When is the town council going into their planning process, the strategic planning process? When?
In December, I think, isn't it?
Like, that's next month.
Correct.
So are we going to wait for them to do that before we get a plan? Or are we gonna at least hammer out something that says, this is the priority section, you know, does the council agree with this? And we're gonna move, for example, I mean, there's some things that we already have I presume, we have the authority, we're just lacking the will. On your number 12, you got, on the recommendations, that seems like a slam dunk. I mean, it seems like the law and everything else is in our favor, or the contracts are in our favor. Let's just go and enforce it. You have an action plan here for design guidelines. Don't let perfect stand in the way of, you know, good.
Right.
Boom, boom, let's just make 4 projects that town council ought to initiate to get that rolling. They may not be perfect, and then they can change it during the planning process. But go with a plan beats no plan,
Right.
9 times out of 10.
So I'm working on the current economic development plan, and that is being implemented right now. And so you know we'll be having the workshop on like the RFP process and for the town hall site. As part of that, it is going to have a public engagement component to it, I assume. And but we are moving forward, and this is tough. So as we make this presentation, it doesn't mean we're not doing the things that are in the current plan.
Right.
What I just wanted to know, where we're trying to go to, is we start looking at is what you're talking about, the next steps in these planning processes. I'm hearing that the public wants more engagement. That's just one of the things. So I am looking to ways to do that as a component to it.
What?
More public engagement.
Oh, yeah.
The other side of it is we do have new thoughts and new ideas coming in, and I'm trying to be cognizant and conscious of that. But we're not doing the circulation plan. We have our next meeting in September. We're still working. I'm working on the RFP right now for implementing the signage. So all the stuff that's in the current plan, we're doing. As we get into the next planning cycle.
Yeah, but let's start building that, is the highest priority thing that we need to do right now I'm looking at 13. Need to address the buildings on Ed Everett. Okay, that's Ed Everett's the street that's behind, what the hell is
The water company.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, where the water company is, but it's behind, what's that shopping center there?
Mariachi Plaza.
Mariachi Plaza. Is that something that we really want to do this year? Or is that good for 2 years? Is that more important than figuring out what we're going to do with an RFP for the town hall?
Right.
Or what we're going to do with Talus?
It's
Yeah,
just,
I think we have to establish long-term and short-term goals. And I think once you've kind of categorized those goals, you're right. I think we take each and we have to figure out what the time frame is related to each of those goals. And you said it, Peter. I mean, this isn't going to happen in a year.
No.
A lot of these processes take a year. You know, it might be sort of trying to take that framework and figuring there's things like dealing with code enforcement and business licenses that can be happening in the short term, but then there's there's the long term of,
Absolutely. The
So,
code, your
zoning
zoning thing is gonna take more than a year, I would guess. Your
But-
design guidelines are probably gonna take more than.
they could.
Can we just ask your recommendations, before we go to the stakeholders, your recommendations, these are your top 5 or your top 10, short-term and long-term, and we'll give feedback on that, and then you take it to the stakeholders. Because you've been working on this a lot longer than any stakeholder or any of us. So you have a sense of, if you do A first, then that messes up what you try to do with B. So it's your expert advice, and
Okay.
then we'll then sort through it and come to an agreement.
That works for me. You know, and the reason I'm asking this question and where we're at is the ask from both, you know, leadership, members of the council, the community, it's all over the place right now. And so, and I just want to make sure that we do get focused in, and I can definitely bring in what I think are those top priority things, and we brought up a lot of those things tonight. You know, and I think we're at the point where we need to start making the tough calls and having the tough conversations.
It just, you know, you're not going to be the decider at the end of the day. You're gonna put together a set of priorities that you're gonna take to the council and strategic planning and say, let's do this. Now, meanwhile, you could have in the background all kinds of stakeholder groups that have a 2-year time horizon on design guidelines or something else. On connecting the Carefree Marketplace to Mariachi Plaza. Get 5 guys together and say, okay, you go figure out how we're gonna do that and come back in 2 years.
Yeah, I want to rephrase that because somebody else brought that up, and it's connecting Mariachi Plaza and to the town center. And that's what not connecting those two together. It was poorly worded. Yeah.
But either way, I mean, that's something that you can leave over there and have a study committee go on for a year. We don't have to deal with it until they frame the issues.
Right.
Bring it back.
Yeah, and so those things are happening. And I just wanted to get to your thoughts, and I think I've gotten some good thoughts about what are some of the priority issues that we need to deal with the,
Okay?
yep.
Yeah, we got plenty to do, yeah. Dream and suggest.
So just kind of going across the board here, what are your top 1 or 2? Your issues, like what do you think, I mean, if you were me,
Just very high level, it's, you know, the saying, if we build it, will people come? We have to make sure that we keep that top of mind, because we could have all this, we could do all this stuff, nobody shows up. And that's what drives our sales tax.
Yeah. Well, the other one we worked on innumerable years ago, and which would be the south side of Sanderson Park, is eliminate the post office and everything in that building and move it somewhere else, and then you could do something there. Remember, for those of us that weren't around, we thought we had a plan once of relocating the post office and getting access to that, getting something besides a 1-story building there that doesn't produce any sales tax to speak of. But that still could be an interesting thing to dream a little bit about.
Yeah.
Enough said. 7 o'clock.
just real quick, you know,
I think the town hall idea,
Yeah.
if that's the most square footage money you're gonna get, bang for a buck, it's a nice location, and really focus on that, developing that out.
And I'll agree with that one. The town hall is a fantastic opportunity that is not being acted upon right now.
And I agree with that, but I also think, how do we diversify the base of the town so that we are not at huge risk if one bit more big place leaves us?
Yeah, good input.
great. I really appreciate this. I mean, this is, allows me to now to focus in on what I think the top, at least the near term and midterm and the long terms are, so.
Well, it gives us all something to
Yep.
think about consistently and get more sincere about it anyway.
And
Yeah,
part of
thank
the-
you for the
it-
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah, and part of the presentation's for the community as well, you know, not
They'll
just you
watch
two,
it.
but
They watch it
But anybody
online.
can watch it, and, you know, I just want to make sure that we get these topics onto the table, and they can kind of hear what the feedback is, and, you know, hopefully, if there's people in the community, or if you guys have any further comments, or, you know,
Well, those walking at home are eating.
yeah, but anybody, just feel free to reach out. And anytime you guys feel like you have a question, you want me to address it or something like that, please reach out to me. I mean, it really is you know, I really respect your opinions, so.
I would like to thank you and all of our staff for all the hard work that you put in that is often goes very much unappreciated. I certainly appreciate your expertise and the time that you've put into this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I agree that that was spectacular
Thank
from
you.
all of you. It really helps focus our discussion and informs us.
Okay, thank you. I got my marching orders. I know I feel pretty clear now, so. Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second. Aye.
Those in favor? Aye.